All right, good morning, folks. Is the recorder on? Awesome. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting of the Municipal Audit Committee meeting to order. We are noticed today, June 8th, from 9:50 to 10:50 a.m. Let's go ahead and start with introductions.
Scott Lee, Internal Audit.
Mike Chadwick, Internal Audit.
Scott Myers.
Felix Rivera, Assembly.
Michael Cipriano, Controller.
Alden Thurn, Acting CFO.
All right, and then do we have any folks on the phone? Okay, got it. All right, so thanks for being here today. We don't have anything under unfinished business, and this meeting was called primarily to talk about the ACFR, our upcoming municipal audit that is done annually. So who is going to be speaking to that? Wonderful, go ahead.
Okay, got a couple of slides. Kevin. Yeah, so if you go to that second slide, so I am the controller, and you don't need to see the details of this too much, but what I'm trying to illuminate here is any of those positions in green. So there's me at the top in black, the gray slots are my supervisors, and the blue are the individual people that I have on the team. And so as of right now, I have 10 of the 19 positions on this team filled. I believe all 19, those are the 19 that are budgeted. So I only, and anything in green isn't filled. So you see I have 3 team lead supervisor types that are not filled. So that is our issue at the moment is not only do I have new people or so to speak, lower level types, but I'm missing a lot of the knowledge that I needed that previously, there's Joy, that previously wrote our financial statements and coordinated the audit. So that experience and expertise has since left. I've only been here for 3 weeks, so I'm still getting my arms around the problem. You can go to the next slide.
And actually, can we go back to it?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for letting us know. So just out of curiosity, how long have those 3 lead positions been vacant?
So various times, but our grant supervisor left right before I started. So he left a month ago. The other 2 positions have been open for months. So they've been open for a long time.
Got it. Want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Cross. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that's my team. It's a little shorthanded. So if you go to the next slide, we are actively recruiting and all that. It is time consuming and doing the best I can. I don't want to get into too much detail on this, but we struggle to compete with other entities in the area for talent in the accounting field. It's very difficult. This is a bit of a busy slide. There's a lot to it, but what I was trying to elaborate here is this was a timeline that Joy provided to the previous acting controller and acting CFO, saying if you wanted to have your financials done and complete by June 30th, which is when they're usually done for the most part, this was a time frame that they needed to hit for deadlines of providing information to the auditors. I threw in a little blue arrow. That's approximately where we are in the process right now. We're about 3.5 months late is where we're at. And so we can compress some of these we might be able to compress some of these timelines, but in general, we're 3.5 months behind where we should be. So that's the problem. And I don't have the staff I need to complete these things in a timely manner. So we are looking for help, which some of that has already been provided, an olive branch with some of these things. So if you move to the next slide. we have some mitigation steps. So we've been working with some consultants, and we're trying not to do any MEA work. That's our base level employees or MEA employees. We want to avoid that at all cost if we can. But the things that we need help with there's some accounting pronouncements, GASB specifically, that are complicated. Altman's helping us with some of that. The Wilkes brothers are helping with a number of things for us. They're helping with the closeout of ML&P. There's still some things left in that need to be closed out. I believe they're almost done with that. And they're working with OMB for the most part on that. For a Floyd advisory group, we're hoping that they can do some review of these work papers for us. But they've been a little bit elusive trying to nail them down on scope and cost. Their rates are more expensive, and I don't want that to get to balloon out of control. So I've been trying to nail them down on a scope, which has been a little bit elusive. But they can help us. They have some experts who audit big cities, and they should be able to move quickly. They're experts, but like I said, we don't want that to go out of control. The other departments have offered to help. They've been having people work extra and prioritize some of the work that we need to help us with some items that they also do and for their individual parts. So the team at AWU has been very helpful. And then Port, Cheryl over there has been very helpful. Payroll has been helping us with some things. So we've been asking for help and getting a lot of help. So that's been great. And we'll continue to do that. Also, in the actual writing of the financial statements, BDO may be able to help us with that. And so Joy's going to talk to that in the next thing. So does that outline the problem, I guess?
Yes, no,
Okay.
no, thank you for outlining the problem and some of the things that you're doing. Just out of curiosity, for these listed consultants here, I assume that's coming, my memory is correct, the assembly approved a request the administration had of like something like $2 million under the CFO for consultants. Is that where this money is coming from?
So those are the contracts that I think were put in place where the assembly gave authorization to use them. Now, remember, there was no funding source with those. It was just the authorization to do that. So I don't believe a lot of these are currently in high dollar usage other than the Wilkes brothers at this particular point in time. And I think at least initially, they might be using some of the forced labor of empty positions to cover some of these expenditures, but that's not going to last very long because we're looking to hire, as well as the fact that the consultants are going to be more expensive than what we have. So we OMB and finance have at least had some preliminary discussions about putting some kind of a funding source memo forward, not maybe for the entire 2 million, but at least to be able to, when he direct these expenditures as they're coming up, to be able to do that. Now, BDO has a contract with the assembly, so I don't know if that necessarily will be a part of the group, and Joy will talk about what the items and the concerns might be with that, and maybe any potential increases that might be in place there. So I don't know if that's going to affect the 2 million and so forth, but we do have to nail down a funding source and get that done, because it was not done in the original allocation by the assembly. So there's some challenges that way, but the Wilkes brothers have been working, and I'm sure we're paying their bills on their particular piece. I don't know if the other ones have really been used that much yet. I think this is what he's talking about as a plan. So the funding hasn't been a huge issue, but it's going to become a big issue real quick if we start using them more than what we currently are.
Got it. Thanks. Any questions before we move on to BDO? All right, I'm not seeing any. So Joy, what you got for us?
Hi, good morning. So I understand there's a few new members of the audit committee. So I guess first off, I just wanted to introduce myself to you. Joy Mariner, I serve as the lead audit partner, and Chair Rivera and I have worked together in this role for quite some time. But first off, I just always want to remind new, audit committee members that what my role is. So I serve as the audit partner. I am required by independent standards, government auditing standards, AICPA standards to remain independent. So I am not part of the administration. I am not part of the assembly. I am not really part of the muni at all, although I live here and I work here and I pay my property taxes, or my husband does. I don't pay a single bill. It's terrible. But all of that to say that my role here is really as an independent third party to come in and look at the books and records that have already happened to determine that the financial statements are materially correct. And so the financial statements, but I always go back to the financial statements. There's a lot of things that come up as issues during the course of the audit, but at the end of the day, my product is a letter, or an opinion letter, we call it, that gets attached to the financial statements. And the financial statements are the responsibility of your management team, and then ultimately the responsibility of the assembly to have accurate financial statements. So to the CFO's point about, funding for additional services, well, the assembly authorize those things. Having the funding there is part of your role to make sure that they have the resources. So the financial statements can be right so that I can opine on the financial statements, right? The financial statements are used by lots of people. I guess for in your case, your citizens, you as the assembly use them. I'm sure you want to know what the numbers are. And so having accurate, reliable financial information throughout the year, but in particular at the end of the year, that closeout is very important. But your bonding agencies also use it. Your granting agencies use it. Insurance companies. It's used by lots of different stakeholders, after the fact. Historically, and I'll go back because I've been working on this job for quite some time. I was a manager when we took over the audit, and that would have been, 12 years ago. I'm looking at Michael because he probably remembers. It was about 12, 13 years ago. Yeah, 12, 13 years ago. So, I actually rolled off of your engagement for some time. I've been back on it for about 3 years. So the financial statement process in theory under your best practices is a June 30 issuance of your financials for the previous year. So 6 months timeline to get them everything closed, audited, pretty, stamped and ready to go to your various stakeholders, the federal government, the state government, your bondholders, the assembly, all of that. There have been some hiccups along the way. The state PERS system screwed you up one year. You had COVID, hit. So that kind of screwed us up for a couple years. The earthquake. And the SAP conversion. We've had a lot of fun over the years with various things that have made the financial statement timeline not work. So, last year, about this time last year, Grant came, was he interim CFO at that point? Nope. But the administration kind of came to me and said, hey, we want to get back to that June 30. The assembly cares about it. We care about it. We want to do it. How do we do that? And that's where, if you go back one slide, Desiree, thank you. That's where we came up with this timeline. Okay, if you actually want to issue on June 30th, let's back into that. Because as part of the financial statements for the municipality, you have a lot of other financial statements that roll into it. You have port, you have AWU, solid waste, the PAC, ACDA rolls into it. Civic Ventures gets its own financial statement as well. And so all of those financial statement audits have to be done, released, complete, issued before you can issue yours. So not just the fact that Michael and his team has to do all this work. These other entities, these other reporting entities also have to get their stuff done so that you can get yours done. So you're kind of relying on a lot of different parties to get your financial statements done. And so we sort of backed into this very, very high level timeline. And as was mentioned, we're a little bit behind from that, but this is like the ideal, right? And I can't say we've met the ideal in recent years. Maybe out of 12, 13 years, it's happened 2 or 3 times, I would say. That usually it's done by the end of July until we had some of these other bigger SAP, earthquake, COVID things happen. And so, while we are kind of behind here, there's some things I'll mention. So for example, we're still working on walkthroughs. So that second item, that cycle walkthroughs, those are probably slated to happen here over the next 2 weeks. But we do have preliminary trial balances. Actually, your federal schedules, Jose did a really good job of getting your grants closed and as close as he could before he left. So your team there. So maybe we're a little bit ahead, on the single audit or the grants testing than we are on some of these other ones. So this is about where we are, but just know there's some things on the that are above it that aren't done. We don't have cash and investments done. They were just finished reconciling this week. We don't have cycle walkthroughs. Not all the IT walkthroughs are done. So some of that stuff is sort of below. Some of the stuff that's later is actually, farther along. ACDA, the PAC, those audits are actually very close to being completed. So just know there's good news and bad news in there. And we're working through what we can. A couple of things that I'll just say, and we should have, I don't know if it was included in the packet. I did send Desiree an audit update, but we're going to start sending those. We really didn't start your audit in the field until 2 weeks ago. And so you'll start getting a weekly email. The one from last week was sent out. Last week's status was kind of sent out yesterday or the day before. So I don't know if you've got that yet, but you'll get that here. And we'll update that on Friday. That email is going to have a lot of just detail in it. I would love your feedback about what you want to have as an update. We have a chart in there, a table of kind of each of the entities and the status of those, but the status is fairly high level. But I'm happy to make that communication what's best for you. What's easiest for you to see, what do you want to know what that's on there. And just know that I can't put things that are judgments in there necessarily. And I also am very careful because it's a public document in a sense, it comes to you as assembly members, not to put any sort of value judgment statements in it. And these are factual type of communication. It's going to be dry. It's boring. I'm an auditor. I'm sorry. But just to let you at least know kind of where we're progressing, what's issued, what's not issued. And then usually I'll start adding items for discussion. So as we identify issues, these are items for discussion, which you should just know are things that are probably potential findings or things that could hold up the issuance of the statements. So really look at the sections for items for discussion, look at that status table, and let me know if there's other things that you want to see in those communications, because really they're for you. A couple quick things that we've been talking about. One is our proposal and our contract is based on 4 federal major programs. And last year you had 8, and we did a contract amendment for that. We actually contract amended it up to 6 and not to 8 because we were able to sort of combine a couple of them. There were 2 port projects. We kind of treated them as one program, although technically there are 2 programs associated with that. And then I believe there was a EPA or CDC grant for ARPA that we combined with another ARPA grant kind of for testing. So we tried to keep it as efficient as we could for the municipality. This year we have 5 major programs. So you will be getting a request to amend the contract to reflect. We actually end up with 6, but again, we're combining 2 of them down to 5. So last year you had 8. This year you have 6. That's good. You're going down. It's a good thing to have more major programs in the sense that means you have more federal funding. And we all know you've had a lot of federal funding for the last couple of years. And, but also because we did have some issues with the findings last year, we have to audit those programs again this year. So ARPA is one because we had we had a finding on subrecipient monitoring. We have to go back and revisit that program again to follow up on the prior year findings. So it will be a major program again for that reason. And I believe 3 of the 6 are related to that. So half of your major programs are related to kind of a repeat from last year. So that's the update on the single audit side. This will be on the update that I email you. Promise you don't have to memorize all of this. And then the only other thing I wanted to talk with you about, and that I've been talking to Mike and Alden about, is what level of assistance can we provide in drafting what we call the ACFR. The ACFR is the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. It's your financial statement. We'll call it ACFR from here on out, and I'll try my very best to remind you of that. But it's just the financial statement. Your financial statement is something like 200 something pages. It's not a small deal. It includes a lot of other information like an organization chart, some statistical information. It has fund level roll-ups, not of every fund individually, but sort of fund level information. And then it has what we call the basic financial statements. We assist probably half of our clients. Oh yeah, here's the update. Thank you, Desiree. So this is an example from last year. So I'm not sure where the one from this week. landed, but it will land in your inbox eventually. So what we've done is kind of this is an example. We have kind of listed, these are the different sections of the audit or the main entities involved in the audit and the status, as well as sort of anticipated issuance or comments. Right now, we don't have anticipated issuance because I think it's too early for us to put a date on it, and I don't want to have false expectations. So I'll just be honest on that side. But we'll have kind of a summary of this, as well as kind of a summary of items that we've discussed and are kind of outstanding. This one was after we've already determined how we would be reporting them. Initially, things will just show up as sort of items for discussion. Just know that those are things that are likely going to be discussed in terms of, do they need to be evaluated and reported as findings? If you can go down just a little bit just to see what other things. And then we'll have kind of just other things that we've identified. These are deficiencies, might be things that are more like management letter comments, things that we want you to be watching out for. And then if we've identified any journal entries as part of the audit process. So this is an example of what we'll provide. And again, your feedback is welcome. So in the financial statements, we draft financial statements for approximately half of our clients. And so it's something that we can certainly assist with. The scope of that, the time it takes to do it, is very dependent on the information we get. And so one of the concerns I have is that I don't want the municipality to be writing a blank check and for us to dive in beyond what we need to be doing. I think that the ideal is, and you've always been able to draft your financial statements in-house, the ideal is to get back to that, right? And the ideal is that majority of the financial statements are really drafted essentially by your team, but maybe compiled by our team if you choose to have us provide that service. I also want to make sure that whatever we do, that there's always independent, that we're independent. And independence is kind of nuanced because in the standard, it says we have to be independent in fact and appearance. And so I think it's one of the things I wanted to look you in the face and say, if we're asked to assist with drafting the financial statements, I need everybody to make sure that they're clear that these are not my financial statements. These are not BDO's financial statements. They are your financial statements. We can serve in a project management capacity. We can serve in a typing capacity. We can actually drop numbers in. We can point out inconsistencies. Hey, Alden, this number should match this number. Can you figure out why and tell us how you want us to fix it? Or we get a schedule, we get a reconciliation. It doesn't agree to one part of the statement. We kick it back. But the appearance is really important to me because I want to make sure the narrative here is these are not BDO's financial statements. They are the municipality's financial statements. So if we agree to assist with this, it would be on an hourly basis. We'd probably set some sort of cap. My guess is you'd want to start with, between $40,000 and $80,000. And, maybe you pick a number in that range. And then, just know that, I can have my typing department. We have paraprofessionals who do this work, do the back schedules, the Excel spreadsheets, put all the data in. They're very efficient at that. And that was done previously by Pam's team here, and I believe Pam left in December.
November, December time period.
Yeah.
Both of her and Kelly.
Yeah. So, that group had done the majority of that data entry side. So I think we can do that fairly efficiently. The challenge comes on the higher level reconciliations, the capital assets, the investments, the intercompany, the transfers, the due to firms, all of the really high level government stuff. And that can't be done at a staff level. And I cannot use my audit team to do it, or there's an independence issue. So I'm going to be using kind of one of our government, Kelly, who's my manager, senior manager, and I would coordinate to make sure that we're staying independent. Our staff will, continue on the audit side, but I don't want them jumping in and trying to do a reconciliation, for example, because that's not a way for us to stay independent. It's, really at the manager level or up. So it's not going to be free time, but we think that we can say, hey, Michael, we got this. We see this on the fund level statement. The two don't seem to match. Kick it back, or do you want us to take 10 minutes to see if we can figure out why that's happening so that we can recommend an adjustment to either the statements or the reconciliation? That's the role we can play. It does need to still remain kind of under the control of the municipality, although we may keep the control version. just so there's one version out there. But that's really the opportunity there, and I'm happy to defer to the administration here and what their preference is. Happy to play that role if you want us to. Happy to stay just the auditor, and I think that really needs to be an audit committee call.
Can you give them an idea of the number of hours? I think we talked about that, the 600 to or 800 to 1,400 hours of work to put the document together, just so they have a perspective of if you expect the limited staff to be able to do that, and they're trying to do all the reconciliations as well as, by the way, while they're doing prior, they're trying to keep current on processing their transactions as well. Do we have the availability of 800 to 1,400 hours for somebody to be putting the information in? And is it this year best practice for us to maybe go with BDO because they have resources that can put that information in on our behalf, but maybe just a ballpark estimate of what it normally takes to actually do the entry and the creation of the book itself?
Sure. So the data entry side of the fund level statements is probably around 300 hours, I would guess, 200 to 300 hours. A small city, we can draft the whole financial statement into 250 hours. In some cases, less if they provide all of the back schedules and the data entry side. The data entry piece is, fairly inexpensive time on our end. The financial statement drafting of the actual, what we call a GASB 34 conversion, which is, I won't go into the details of all of that, but it's essentially taking your fund level statements and creating your government-wide statements. That's really the piece that needs a lot of kind of higher level of attention, and the reconciliation of the transfers and the inter-fund balances and some of those unusual things. That's the piece that's probably somewhere between 300 and 400 hours. There's probably another 400 hours that I can't do, that your team still needs to do in order to stay, for me to be independent. Those are the reconciliations of the capital assets, debt, and the transactions that have to go in for capital assets and debt are the two biggest areas. PERS, Michael's already working on PERS. So Kelly sat down with him, I think, and walked through the schedules from last year so he can do that himself. So there's probably, as you mentioned, Alden, between 12 and 1,600 hours there. We can't do 400 of them. We can do somewhere between fairly easily between 400 and 800. I hope it's more like 600 hours is kind of what I would guess. And about half of that is probably data entry level parapro time. And the other 300 or so is likely going to be at the manager or up level.
And if I could reiterate, all of the people that have ever prepared a financial statement in the past with any experience are no longer at the municipality of Anchorage. So, and you had asked earlier, Felix, about how long those people, as we mentioned, left November, December time period. So it's been some while, and the experience and knowledge that they had for all the years that they put it together went with them at that particular point. So that's where Michael's challenge is right now is where is the limited resources they currently have and the knowledge and the consultants, where's their best time spent? Because as you heard from Joy, us doing the numbers and reconciling and pulling and coming up with them is where we need to spend our time. And if they have an opportunity to have some knowledge, because the paraprofessionals have done statements, so they're familiar with where numbers go and all that kind of stuff. It seems like it would be a best use of our funds this year. It's not our long-term goal, but we would like to get back to it. But he has nobody that has the capability of doing it, and it seems like it would make a lot of sense for this year to focus his limited staff on what they're assigned to do. And if we have an availability of BDO being able to perform that additional function, what it will do is allow us to maybe get our financials out a little quicker than what it would take if we didn't do that, which is then we'd have to, the staff would still have to do all the things they're doing, and then they'd have to have time to enter the information themselves. And that's just going to extend the amount of time it takes to be able to actually produce the documents. So I'm very supportive of trying to use all of our contractors, consultants, other municipal employees, wherever they may be, to assist in this process, given the lengthy time frame that we're facing here going forward. The June, I've been here 8 years. I've never seen this be done in June. I think that's a wishful thinking. And of course, I went through SAP and everything. I think historically, and I could be wrong, but it's like end of September tends to be when I've seen some of the prior controllers and people getting it out and so forth. And that is even a kind of a worst case scenario. Well, would be a dream this year from my perspective to be able to do this. So that's one of the main reasons I asked to call this meeting, so that we can get in front of you. There's no surprises of what's going on, and we want to be very, very upfront and have documents that you guys can see and know where we're at and what the challenges that we face. And together we'll figure out how to produce the financials in the most efficient, time-consuming, and legitimate way that we possibly can. So. And we can certainly open for questions, but I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on what I see and what we're trying to communicate here with you today.
Great. Yeah, go ahead.
If I may, I just want to point out, we do already draft the financial statements for Port, Civic, and Solid Waste. So that's already part of the contract that we have. AWU drafts their own financial statements, and I think the plan is to keep it that way this year. So thank you.
Great, thanks. So I have a few questions, and then happy to open it up to other members. So first is, if I heard correctly, BDO is hoping for roughly about 600 hours that you can sort of realistically staff with the resources that you have. And then I also heard $40,000 to $80,000 suggested to start. Could you just sort of give me a ballpark of if 600 hours was what we eventually contracted with BDO to help with authoring, what the cost might be for that?
Yeah, that's on the high end. So, in theory, our billable rate's around 140 for the Muni. I would probably discount that a bit for the ACFR draft, because I can do parapro level for a lot of the data entry side. I'd have to probably put together sort of a budget there, but I guess my point in having a cap there to start is it would sort of add a level of accountability to your team to be using us where they need to use us, instead of turning over the process and saying, oh, well, BDO is drafting the financial statements. And that's what my bigger piece here, whether you choose to use us to draft the statements or one of the other contractors, that's entirely up to you. My big thing is I want to make sure that there's never a situation where somebody says, well, those are BDO's job to draft the statements. We are assisting with the draft, or we can assist with the draft. So I would say a cap is just a good best practice to limit incentives and not to balloon on my side either.
Got it. Thanks. Okay. Yeah, that math makes sense to me. Then the second question I have is, let's assume that we do invest in these additional contracting resources to help get this done. What would be a realistic timeline then? Because September 30th is the federal deadline to get these done. Is that accurate?
That's the federal deadline, correct?
Yeah. So then we definitely need to get done by September 30th, but let's say we actually do invest in these resources. I mean, we want to get something for it. We want to get it earlier than September 30th. So is there an idea of when we would be able to get it done?
And I'll punt to these guys in a second, but I'll just say at this point, I believe your September 30th deadline's in jeopardy.
It gets you in a second, Kevin. Then third question is, so right now, just looking at staffing, right? September 30th deadline's in jeopardy. Has there been any consideration of non-staffing issues? Because that always comes up every year. There's some issue, whether it's PERS, whether there's something else that gunks the wheels. So is there anything right now that you are looking at and you're saying, yeah, that this particular issue might take a little bit more time than we anticipated?
So when we met, and those of you who weren't there, in the audit planning communication, the big new thing is GASB 87, which is your leases. And you did have a resource dedicated to getting through that. But that is a brand new standard. It's not easy to implement. And you have more than one lease here at the Muni. I don't even want to guess how many, 1,000?
I can't even imagine. For example, every plane at Merrill Field has a lease. You have to account for that as debt and an asset. it's a nightmare. I've done the implementation in the private sector, and it's time consuming. We have some resources dedicated to it. It's a known quantity as far as we know what we need to do, but it's hard to even figure out sometimes what is a lease. There's some things that are leases that you wouldn't even think of as a lease. And so I believe we have our arms around that, but that I'm trying to think how to say this properly. It's not, that's not going to hold us up necessarily, other than it takes time to get all that accounted for properly.
And it takes a significant amount of time to audit, and I don't have lease schedules yet. So I have not actually audited it.
Right.
And so you guys are dealing with this in a water sewer company and a port and an airport. Airport leases, a lot of them are regulated, so they're out of scope. Some of them are not regulated, so they are in scope. It's very, very complicated. So that isn't a staffing issue necessarily. It's an external standard adoption, but it is a staffing issue in that you've known about this standard for 6 years, right? And so your team has been working on it for quite some time. And really there's not somebody to take the lead on getting it over the finish line. So it is staffing related, but that's the biggest new thing. Otherwise, I think, the things that would cause you not to get to the September 30th deadline are simply just the fact that we are in June and we don't have a single standalone issued. And we don't have there's 3 things that hit all of the statements pretty much. Debt, cash and investments, and PERS. The state's already issued their PERS standard, so that won't hold you up this year. But all 3 of those have to be audited and put into those standalones and issued before the muni file can even be finished. So that's really the reason why I say that. It's in jeopardy. I would love to make it happen. We have the time allocated in July to really dive in, but I know that not all the reconciliations are ready for us.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, I so greatly appreciate all the hard work you guys are doing. I know that there's a significant shortage of accountants, CPAs, CFAs, everybody that we need in order to make this work. Also in the private sector, and which is probably why we're losing some good talent to that market, because there's such a vacuum. And so like your diligence and everything you're doing, I don't think I can profess how much I really appreciate you. As a business owner, I lost my CPA in the fall. She passed away. She's been handling my books for almost 10 years, and we're still struggling 6 months later to find a replacement. And everybody's like, we're too busy. So I really appreciate what you're doing. I do want to ask, you had said other cities, meaning that you guys have provided services for other entities, and you said smaller or bigger. I guess I'm kind of curious what you consider to be big, medium, small, and where that sits. And is the problems that we're having unique, or are you seeing this issue elsewhere with a shortage of qualified accountants and getting reporting done? Is this a growing trend? Kind of just curious on how Anchorage is doing compared to other regions.
So for example, we audited a couple other big cities nationwide that are even bigger or similar size to the municipality. You're a large city for Alaska, probably the largest. And in a lot of ways, you're a lot more complex than some of even larger cities nationwide, because you're operating a port, an airport, a water utility. You don't have the electric fund anymore, so that's helpful. Plus, you have a huge permanent fund. So when you look at the number of kind of businesses you're operating, you're kind of like operating 12 businesses or 52, depending on how you look at it. And so that makes you just more complex. In terms of the staffing issues, I would say they're more pronounced right now at the municipality than we've seen at most of our other clients, but that is a trend completely across the state and nationwide, especially as you've got kind of the retirement of a lot of people over the last couple of years, which that's been part of the equation for here at the municipality. It hasn't been an easy time to be a municipal employee. It hasn't been an easy time to be an accountant. I feel like I've gotten 3 master's degrees over the last 3 years, and it has not been an easy time to just be in business. As a business owner, I'm sure you know that. And so staffing for all accountants is really short. The fight to get people is costing a lot of money, and certainly the service providers at the public accounting firms, we're not just awash in qualified accountants who we can just throw at people either. And so it's definitely a nationwide problem. I would say it's a little bit more pronounced here than in some other communities.
Thank you. I also recognize that when you bring in new people, that means that the individuals that are working have to take off their task in order to bring people up. So there's a lag time when you bring individuals in, and it just depends on the caliber of that individual in order to grasp quickly the systems we put in place. The part of the services that you provide, do you provide feedback to us on things that we can be doing to streamline our processes? Have you found us to be receptive? I mean, what is that? I mean, other than just providing the reporting, I mean, it seems to me like because you have that experience looking at other cities, municipalities, you can say, here's different systems that you can put in process. Is that something you might be able to help us with?
So every year we do. Some of that's done formally. The bulk of it's done informally, just because auditing standards, we have to be careful what we say you should or shouldn't do. But certainly as we look at reconciliations, as we look at systems or processes, and we have to understand your internal control systems, we're going to identify those things, mention those, flag those. That was especially true during the SAP conversion because there was a lot of pain, and I'm looking at a few people that were involved in that process. Or the first year, I think we had, 8 different things were like, this needs fixed and this needs fixed and this needs fixed. Maybe it was a lot more than 8, but maybe 8 in writing. And then, those were really corrected very well by the next year. There were issues with payroll in particular, but some of the other, just the control aspects of the IT system were just in flux a little bit. But even if you look at just this example from last year and kind of deficiencies, we, that timeline for closure, we did have recommendations around when you would maybe review cash and investments or the timing of your debt covenant calculations, doing those a little bit sooner and reviewing those, adding some more steps to make sure that they're done. Because that was something, for example, the debt covenants, that your team had done that in public finance and done it very well, but it didn't necessarily get communicated over to controller division for inclusion in the financial statements and that final tie out process. So, those are the kinds of things we see as inefficiencies. We've talked about this for years about kind of the silos here at the municipality and how sometimes the way that the silos are created and work can cause inefficiencies in communication between departments. And I don't think that's a secret to anybody here in this room, but that's the case for, I guess, probably most large entities where this person's kind of walking in their lane and they're doing other things in their lane and they don't necessarily realize, oh, accounting might need to know that. For example, we've had over the years issues with getting all the payables or the invoices together. So you maybe have a department that they're doing a great job. They're monitoring their vendors, but they haven't gotten all their invoices in. And accounting can't close payables until they have all the invoices, outstanding invoices from all the vendors. So there's a lot of chasing down that goes. And when we look at internal controls, that's the I in internal controls. That's information and communication. How is communication happening between those different departments? That's the large area. That's probably the largest area where we see breakdowns and efficiency.
I just have one last question, if I may, sir. The September 30th reporting deadline for the federal requirement, what are the largest ramifications from not meeting that date? Someone can provide that. And that's a question in general to anybody that can provide that. I'm just kind of curious, if we don't hit that, what is that trigger? And beyond that date, like how does that escalate into significant issues as far as other federal funds? Maybe you can speak to that. Thank you. Or whoever's willing to contribute. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can address that if you'd like. So the September 30th deadline it's a 9-month deadline after fiscal year end. It's actually also a state deadline, and it's for what we call the single audit. On the federal side, it's the uniform guidance. On the state side, it's the state single audit. And essentially, if you receive federal or state awards and they're over a certain threshold, you have to have your compliance auditing done and actually gets uploaded to the White House. The information gets uploaded to the White House by September 30th, by 9 months later. If you don't make that deadline, and in order to submit that, you can't just do compliance. You actually have to upload the financial statements with it, unfortunately. The requirement says financial statement audit and single audit get uploaded as a package. So if you don't make that deadline, you are considered a high-risk auditee. you're already a high-risk auditee because we had a material weakness last year in your grant compliance. So that doesn't change your status of your risk level. For the next, it's a 2-year ramification with a material weakness. So essentially, you're no longer what's considered low risk. You're not low risk. There's actually no such thing as a high risk. There's low risk and not low risk, which is dumb. And then the only other implication is that there's no penalty or anything like that. But when federal government's deciding who to award grants to, they will take that into consideration. Now, in Alaska, I would say that they're generally speaking, I've not seen somebody miss out on a grant award for not meeting that deadline, as long as it's not terribly bad, like you haven't submitted for years, and why would we give the money to you? But generally, I would say, especially in Alaska, grants that they want targeted to a certain area, community, or purpose, they're going to find a way to get the money. So instead of awarding it to you, maybe they'd award it to the state and then have the state subcontract with you, or have the state sub-award to you, to make sure that the end result is still where they want it to be. They want the money here. They're going to figure out a way to get it to you here, even if it's not through the muni. But generally, that's going to be if, multiple years. That doesn't mean a granting agency, when they're putting up 3 or 4 proposals, isn't going to say, well, these guys don't have their act together, I'm going to pick this one. So that could be what's happening in the background. We just don't see that decision-making process. There's not enough transparency around it. Missing the state deadline, after a certain point, you put your community revenue sharing funding in jeopardy, and it's not called that anymore. Community assistance. Kind of looking at Joseph. I think it's revenue assistance. Anyway, it's community revenue sharing for the rest of my life anyway, because that's what I know it as. But it's kind of the general funding the state provides. And I think, you have a good relationship with the state you can inform them of what's going on. I believe it takes a full year before that funding comes up, and it's on a state fiscal year. So you probably have somewhere until June before they start getting too up in arms about paying you that money. So I won't speak for the state on that, but that's the only ramification I'm aware of on the state side.
If I could add, the bond rating agencies look at our financials as well. And as you know, we've been downgraded each of the last 2 years, mainly because of the FEMA fronting of money and those kind of things. But financial statements and the financial solvency of the municipality, which the statements reflect, certainly are viewable by the bond rating agencies, which obviously affects the debt issuance and rates that the municipality would pay for their projects. So I just wanted to add that could be a fairly big financial issue as well.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm still catching up. So along those lines, I was wondering, and maybe this is not a thing in this particular context. I know, there's the concept of asking for an extension, or, basically saying up front, we're not going to be able to meet this deadline, which I know you're smiling. I don't know if that's possible or if that's beneficial, because what I'm hearing is that it's not that October 1st, something bad suddenly happens, but certainly it doesn't reflect well on us to not meet that deadline. And then I wondered specifically too, for was it GAB 87, you mentioned the new kind of compliance. I don't know anything about that specifically, but is that something where we could, is there any kind of internal triaging basically of, we'll get these done because they're the most critical pieces of that, and then maybe some of these airport leases are less critical? And again, I'm asking because I'm not in your world, so I don't know if that's even a thing, but I know with other grants or other kind of, arrangements, it is sometimes possible to ask for an extension, or maybe that's beneficial. So I just wonder if that's an option.
Mr. Chair, if I may. So there's no extension for the federal state single audit. They just don't do that. Actually, last year, Alaska got an extension. They sometimes grant sort of these, like with COVID, they did with all of Alaska last year because of Typhoon Murdoch. And they just applied it to everybody. So you didn't actually miss the deadline last year, I believe, because of that. I know. Don't pray for a typhoon. It's a bad plan. Anyway, all of that to say, there are extenuating circumstances where the federal government grants bulk waivers, but they don't do that on an individual basis. And then the state government just has never managed to actually do even a bulk waiver, but there doesn't seem to be, they've been very patient, I guess, in those situations. And they did do a waiver, I believe, with COVID. To your second question on GASB 87, yes. And I believe there are whole parts of it that are complete. And so that's something we'll work with your team on here. And Michael, I don't know if you want to speak to that further, but we can certainly get started at least on evaluating what's been done so far to some degree. Really, our risk, though, is that there's been something left off of the list. It's a completeness risk. So you have these 1,000 leases on your list, for example. Where's the 1,001 lease that's worth $15 million that somebody forgot to put on the list? That's really the risk from our perspective, that something's not on the list, which makes it hard for us to kind of test that the list complete if we don't have the full list. But we can certainly test the work that's been done. And to that end, the previous previous acting controller had run the rate memo by us, for example, as they were adopting this standard. This is our policy. Joy, can you and your team look at this? This is how we're going to evaluate it, what discount rate we're going to use. Can you look at this? And so they have been kind of running these things by us as they complete them.
Yeah, we are working it. It's going. So I guess my statement was that it's being resourced as much as we can. So it's one of our top priorities because it's a big lift.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I appreciate that. Yeah, I just wondered if there was kind of a points for effort situation where you could say, hey, we're not done yet, but we're trying. But I understand what
the
you're
tricky
saying.
part is the completeness thing. So it's not, we can't even, I mean, as far as the work that she needs to audit, or your team, yes, but the completeness part needs to happen, and that's tricky.
On the bonds, you have already received an extension for the bond filing. And the last deadline kind of for a draft financial for that is July 31. So we were just talking about that, at a very minimum, it's worth your team's effort, which they will put through to get some level of draft available, even if the numbers are very, very unaudited and very draft. To have something submitted to bonding agencies by July 31 is fairly paramount.
And we can always go to the state and say, you took all of our employees. So as a result of that, please be gentle to us until we can get our financials done.
Yeah, I'm not sure how good of a reception we'd get there, but we'll see. Wonderful. Well, thanks all for the discussion here. This has been helpful and enlightening. Just yet another example of workforce issues impacting us. So I guess, Joy, you did make a statement pretty explicit that you want approval from this committee, or at least some sense of this committee. So I guess a question to Joy or to Alden, would you like this committee to make a motion and take a vote on the idea or concept of BDO authoring and stepping into that role?
Assisting with authoring.
Thank you. So that's a yes. You would like this committee to take a formal position on it?
I would, because I think we should do everything possible to get our financials out as quickly as we can. I believe this is a very valuable resource that this year we're going to need. As I mentioned before, it's not our long-term goal. Michael is working with HR, and we've made some real good progress lately in posting positions. So they've been very helpful to us and supportive of our efforts. And the long-term goal is to not have to do this in the future. I think this year, you have to do it. And I think between Michael and Joy, they can put very good parameters to belay any concerns that Joy has on keeping their separation. But I think we need to get every resource we possibly can. And if she has resources available who are knowledgeable in putting financials together, I would recommend that you support that. And not only in a decision in doing that, but also eventually it's going to be a financial decision as well since the contract is with you. And I just wanted to bring out one other thing that she talked about, that it's not just the extra financial for that. She did mention that 4 is what's in the budget right now, and you're going to need to increase the budget for BDO to go to 5. So last year you went to 6. So I didn't want that to be lost, that there's actually, you're going to deal with a 4 to 5 automatically because that's what's going to happen. And that's an increase in the budget. And then in addition to that, we're talking about having this opportunity to prepare the financials, which is an additional number. So we talked about it. I just didn't want you focusing only on one additional increase that's going to happen, because she did mention that last year you paid from 4 to 6, this year 4 to 5. Joy can clarify
Yeah,
that.
and we're still looking at the state single audit. The state single audit requirements actually lessened. And so our hope is actually we can cut some from the state line item. I just don't have that number for you yet.
Okay, thanks. I assume that the 4 to 5 increase will just come to the assembly at some separate time. Okay. All right, so then here's just based off of the discussion, here's the motion, and would like to get just feedback on the motion. So the motion is going to be that this committee endorses BDO while maintaining its independence in fact and appearance, assisting with authoring of the ACFR, and sending an appropriation between $40,000 to $80,000 to the Assembly for approval. I think that captures a lot of the parameters. Is that fair? That motion fair? Okay, so with that, as I described it, oh, do you have a question, Ms. Brawley?
I just have a point of information. So I certainly support this, but I'm not technically a committee member, and I'm partly here in my capacity as the budget committee. So I'm happy to vote, but I'm also happy to sit out. So I just want to check.
Yeah, and thanks for that. Only committee members can vote on this motion. Yep,
But I do support it.
thanks. Okay, so as I described the motion into the record, can someone please make a motion and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Mr. Myers, seconded by Mr. Cross. Can you go ahead and do a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Rivera,
Yes.
Mr. Myers,
Yes.
Mr. Cross,
Yes.
Mr. Cipriano,
Yes.
Mr. Thurn,
Yes.
and we do not have a meeting manager, so.
Thanks. And just for the record, Mr. Thurn did vote yes, so that motion passes 5-0. Okay, actually, we only have 1 minute left, so I need to go to audience participation. Would any members of the public like to participate? All right, seeing and hearing no one, thanks everyone for the discussion, and this meeting is adjourned.